Hello and welcome. I'm Miriam Cates for GBN Originals. Now, today we're looking at a topic that's been at the forefront of British politics for years. Yes, immigration. The question on everyone's mind is, why is it so hard to get immigration numbers down? Let's face it, immigration has become the hot potato of British politics, and it seems it's one that no one wants to hold on to for very long. But why? Why is it that government after government, regardless of party, has failed to bring these numbers down? Well, a bombshell report from Policy Exchange, penned by former Home Office Director Stephen Webb, has shed some light on this perplexing issue. Let me tell you, it's not pretty. Let's hear what he had to say.
The problem the report identifies is that both the legal and illegal immigration we have enormous difficulties with, and the two actually have to be taken together because they sort of bleed into each other. On the illegal immigration side, the ECHR case law is developed in a quite extraordinary way. I don't think anybody looking back at the original ECHR would argue about the things that we shouldn't be torturing, extrajudicial killings, privacy and family life. The problem has been, since the 1970s, this idea of a living instrument has meant that essentially the Strasbourg judges have been making up cases as they go along. Yeah. And we're getting to a position where it's really extremely difficult to remove anybody. There are some extraordinary cases that we cite, the man who murdered someone in the back of an ambulance but couldn't be deported to his country in Africa because he wouldn't be able to get his meds. Yeah. Somebody who was convicted of rape but claimed to be bisexual, so successfully appealed against the deportation to Jamaica. This is all case law. And I say on Article 3, the idea is that there is a absolute right not to face ill treatment, irrespective of the risk you might be posing.
So, of course, this was a convention that was designed in the aftermath of the Second World War, telling states not to torture their own citizens. Yeah. And now it's evolved into preventing states from deporting people who are a real danger to their own citizens.
And it's expanding in extraordinary directions. Also outside the immigration, there's the recent Switzerland ruling where basically climate change was identified as an Article 8 right. So it's growing and growing.
Who is in charge of it?
Well, there are a series of member states within the Council of Europe that are the convention signers, but ultimately the judges are making the rules.
And we don't even know who they are.
We have a British judge, and the British judge voted against the recent Swiss ruling, voted against in the 70s against the initials and moved towards...
But I'm thinking of the flight to Rwanda that was blocked by a judge. We were never told which judge it was.
No, that's right. There was a particular way that judges could make rulings anonymously, which is quite extraordinary. Though even if you knew their name, there wouldn't be anything you could do about it.
No.
So there is a desperate need for reform across Europe. And I think what's interesting about the report as well is there's a perception out there in the country that this is just a problem we make because we're too scrupulous about enforcing the law here and other people just ignore it. And that really isn't true. There have been a couple of kind of high-profile cases, like in France, where they defied a ruling and deported somebody. But it's actually very rare. Most other countries are getting more asylum seekers than we are. Most of them are struggling to deport, remove even as many as we do. And there's a growing sense of new governments are coming in. Our feeling in the report is there's definitely scope for a reform coalition to come together and say the status quo, the case law we have at the moment is unacceptable, and we should work to remove it. It's going to be very difficult, and I think we have to accept that if we're going into a reform process like that, it may well be that we're going to have to leave. We have to say the status quo is not acceptable. If we can't get the reforms we want, there are various other options, including leaving completely or rebasing the constitution.
Now, first of all, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Yes, the pro-immigration lobby. This report reveals that a staggering £11 million is being poured into NGOs focused on migration issues. That's £11 million spent on research, on analysis and lobbying to keep our borders as open as a 24-hour Tesco. But wait, there's more. An additional £30 million of your taxpayers' money is being funneled into universities. And guess what? Most of these institutions have a clear bias towards liberal immigration policies. It's like we're funding our own opposition. Now, you might be thinking, surely the government wants to control immigration? Well, it's not that simple. The report highlights that there are mixed incentives within the government itself. It's like watching a tug of war where both sides are wearing the same jersey. And let's not forget about the human rights case law. Over the past 30 years, it's been moving in an increasingly liberal direction. It's as if we're trying to row upstream with a paddle made of jelly. But before we start feeling too sorry for ourselves, it's worth noting that we're not alone in this struggle. The report points out that other European countries are facing very similar challenges. So what's the solution? Well, according to the report, we need to change the incentives involved. And the report has some very interesting ideas that might just ruffle a few feathers. First of all, the report proposes an auction system for work visas. So a bit like eBay, but for the right to work here in the UK. The highest quality candidates would get the visas, and the money for these visas would go to increasing wages in the care sector, which is, of course, vitally important to recruit enough British people to that sector. Next, the report recommends the introduction of a system of sureties, like a deposit for your visa. If you overstay, you lose the deposit. It's a bit like handing over your credit card when you rent a car, but instead you're guaranteeing that you will leave the country when your visa expires. The report suggests that anyone who travels to the UK illegally should be banned from ever settling here in Britain. Instead, they'd be transferred to safe accommodation on Ascension Island and then either sent back to their own home country or resettled elsewhere somewhere safe. The report also recommends tougher laws to block visas and overseas aid to countries that don't cooperate in returning their nationals. It's a bit like telling your mate they can't come to the pub until they pay you back that tenner that they owe you. Well, the report also calls for much tougher penalties for those employing and renting accommodation to people who don't have the right to be here in the UK. Finally, the report suggests forming a cross-European coalition to reform the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, we shouldn't rule out leaving the ECHR altogether. Now, let's hear from someone who's been in the trenches on this issue. That's the Honourable Alexander Downer AC, former Foreign Minister of Australia. He has penned the foreword to this Policy Exchange report, and he doesn't mince his words. He says, and I quote, "The issue of immigration has become one of the most contentious in the Western world. So far, few countries have managed the issue well, but the British immigration system is a particular shambles." Ouch. But he's not wrong, is he? And Downer goes on to warn that a British government will have to, sooner or later, get control of the immigration programme. If they fail to do so, we can be sure that populists and extremists will get elected who promise to do it. Now, the immigration issue isn't just a political hot potato, it's a ticking time bomb. And if we don't defuse it soon, we might find ourselves dealing with some very unsavoury character who promise quick fixes. It's time for our government to stop avoiding this issue and take decisive action. We need to change the incentives, tighten our laws, and yes, maybe even rethink our relationship with certain international conventions. Because at the end of the day, it's not about left or right, it's about what's best for Britain. And right now, what's best for Britain is getting a handle on those immigration numbers. This is Miriam Cates. Don't forget to subscribe to GB News YouTube.
At GB News, we believe in the power of free speech. We're not afraid to ask the tough questions, challenge the status quo, and give you a voice. While others silence dissent, we champion the truth. So by becoming a GB News member, you're not just supporting free speech, you're defending it. Please do consider supporting us today. Together, we'll hold the powerful to account and make sure your voice is always heard. Simply go to gbnews.com/support and stand with us for what matters most.